Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rotoworld Football Show. I am Patrick Daugherty, joined today by Mr. Denny Carter as we get ready to preview the NFC West for the 2024 season, the 2024 fantasy season. And we have a special guest right off the jump. We have Rams beat reporter Adam Grosbard from the Orange County Register is going to help us break down all things Rams. And then later in the show, we're going to have Arizona Cardinals reporter Johnny Venerable. You may remember him from last year's preview show where he delighted the audience with the story of Colt McCoy pointing during mental visual reps. They took practice reps that just involved him not actually passing, but pointing. So Johnny will be here later in the show. In between, Danny and I will talk about the Seattle Seahawks and the San Francisco 49ers. But yeah, Adam, we're here to talk the Rams. We're here to talk Sean McVay. We're here to talk fantasy points. The Rams always produce a lot of them. But we'll just start with the ongoing all spring, all summer fantasy manager freak out, and that is in the backfield in Southern California with the Rams. Kyren Williams was a league-winning pick in 2023, even though he missed, 4 to 5 games. I believe he was the number 2 overall PPR scorer. He's had injuries in the past. He's battling another, this time supposedly minor foot injury, didn't practice much this spring. And the Rams made Michigan's Blake Corum, a guy who scored 27 touchdowns last season, the number 3 running back off the board. You might just be guessing at this stage of the game, but is Corum here to serve more as like a breather back, a change of pace back, or is this about to become more of a committee in LA again?
Well, so first off, Kyren was a league-winning waiver wire ad, I think, for most people. No one saw him as a starter last year. I don't think we have the same situation going in here. There's a much greater level of trust and just kind of like understanding between Sean McVay and Kyren Williams than there ever was with Cam Akers. They just seem to be on the same page, and they really like Kyren a lot. I think to the point that what they got in Corum and what Sean McVay talked about during the draft night was that Corum matches a lot of what Kyren gives you. They were kind of looking for a Kyren clone when they drafted Blake. And so they see, Blake can definitely spell Kyren, but Blake also, if Kyren gets hurt, which he missed all of OTAs with a knee issue, he's had injuries each of his first 2 seasons in the league. They see Corum as someone who can take over the lead back role if Kyren has to go on the IR for any reason.
So sounds like from a fantasy perspective, maybe you're saying more of a breather fill-in back with Blake Corum. Do you think, totally guessing, I'm sure, but like week 1, will Blake Corum be getting touches, or is he there mostly just to spell Kyren?
Yeah, I think you will see some. I think, you kind of saw the vision for it after Kyren came off of the IR. Prior to that, Kyren was getting like 95, 96% of snaps. It was unsustainable, and sure enough, he gets an ankle injury. But you kind of saw the vision for what I think you're going to see this year towards the end of last season. Ronnie Rivers got a lot of really good productive drives where he took over an entire drive and put up some points and was given opportunities in the red zone on those drives instead of bringing Kyren back in to try to punch it in. So I think you're going to see a similar usage for Blake throughout the early part of the season. Maybe he gets 1 out of every 2 or 3 drives, 1 out of every 3 or 4 drives, something like that, just to kind of spell Kyren and keep him fresh.
So, Denny, you go.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Adam, that what you're saying so far is not going to be greeted kindly by fantasy managers who have spent all off season saying it's over for Kyren. It's Corum season, no doubt about that. And what you're saying, just so I'm clear, is that this is not a repeat of the Cam Akers situation in that Kyren Williams is much more trusted by Sean McVay. And I think I'm asking for confirmation on that because, man, every time Sean McVay talks about Blake Corum, it sounds like he's describing like prime Todd Gurley. Okay, so but this is what you're saying though. This is not the same situation.
I mean, Sean speaks the same way about Kyren. He really loves Kyren. He talks, but he also knows that Kyren is injury prone. They wanted to add depth to the running back room, but they see Kyren as the starter. Like, this is going to be Kyren's job to start the year. It's not going to be like Kyren gets a ceremonial start in week 1 and then Blake comes off the bench and plays 85% of the snaps like what happened last year. I don't see that happening. It's a different situation than Cam Akers was a year ago.
So to put too fine of a point on it, Blake Corum is currently the RB35, RB3 flex in fantasy. Is it a waste of a late round pick for fantasy managers? Is it someone you should just wait to get off the waiver wire, or do you think it is good to stash at the back of your roster?
It's going to depend on bench size, but I do think that, I think he'll have some standalone value. I think from 1 week to the next, it's going to be tough to predict, but I do think, he will be one of the more valuable handcuffs, just due to how Sean wants to use both running backs and the fact that Kyren has his injury history.
So we started off the show talking about a player who may or may not even be scoring points in week one. Denny wants to ask you about two players now that we know will be scoring fantasy points in week one.
Certainly Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Now, Kyren Williams was one of the most important players in fantasy last year. Puka Nacua was the most important player in fantasy last year because he was an elite receiver who was either drafted very late or plucked off the waiver wire after he had 35 targets in week one or whatever it was. Okay, there's no way to look it up. We don't know. But I did want to say, I saw some reports recently that Cooper Kupp is looking healthy, which is something we couldn't have said in some off seasons, some recent off seasons. McVay said you have no idea how hurt he was last year, which I believe because it did seem like a minor miracle every time Cooper Kupp got off the ground after a tackle. So I wrote recently about the Rams receivers, and I had this stat, and I just want to ask you a question after this. I said in the 11 games last season where both Kupp and Nacua were active, Nacua saw 92 targets to 89 targets for Kupp, and the wideouts had almost identical target per route run rates. Is this a situation where Nacua comes into the season as the clear-cut number one, or is this a 1A, 1B situation?
Yeah, I see this as 1A, 1B, and trying to predict who's going to get more targets, more yards, all of that is going to be really difficult to do. I know Puka came out of nowhere and took so many people by storm. He's going to be a really high pick this year, and he should be. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between a guy going into his second year versus someone like Cooper, who's, had his Triple Crown season, Super Bowl MVP, all that. He's proven he can be a league winner too. And they trained together this offseason.
Right.
Puka wants to be, Cooper Jr. And they trained together at Cooper's house, and they were doing conditioning. And like the first day, Puka throws up in the bushes. And he's just not, there's a different level, like in terms of someone who's been in the league for a while, knows how to take care of their body versus someone who's getting their first real off season instead of like working for the draft. I expect Cooper is going to be, he looked really good in OTAs. He also looked really good that first week of training camp last year before he pulled his hamstring. Like he looked like the old dude. He looked like the ankle wasn't bothering him at all.
Yeah.
And then he was dealing with a hamstring and an ankle throughout last season. There were a lot of games where you could just kind of see he just didn't have it.
Mm-hmm.
This season, I expect, as long as he stays healthy, those guys are going to kind of trade off big weeks. Sometimes they might put up big numbers together. It's going to be difficult to predict because it's going to be what does Sean, what does Stafford, what do the two of them when they're meeting with Stafford in the mornings, like what do they see each week and how can they kind of use each other to get the other one targets. So it's going to be a really fun passing game to watch this year.
So Puka Nacua is the wide receiver 7 right now. Cooper Kupp's the wide receiver 22. We all know the main concern with Cooper, of course, is the injury history. 2 years now since the record-breaking 2021, didn't reach 1,000 yards either of those seasons. But it sounds like you're saying that 15-spot gap between the two of them is too large. And then when Cooper Kupp's healthy, it is just going to be we're kind of just throwing darts at a board, guessing who might produce more any given week.
Yeah, I know he didn't finish the 2022 season, but he was still a monster, averaging, I forget what it was, PPR, half PPR, whatever it was, but like he was still putting up monster points at the beginning of the 22 season before the ankle. I don't think there's reason to count him out. When Stafford gets along, they just know each other. They really know each other. And last year, you didn't really get to see that because of the injuries. Cooper was like a step slower than Stafford was expecting him. He was breaking different. Like they just weren't on the same page the way they usually are. And I think you're going to see that again this year.
You referenced that. You referenced a more fun Rams passing attack. Matthew Stafford has kind of like clockwork been around 35 attempts per game each of his 3 years in LA. Do you expect that just to remain, Stafford's usage, their approach to remain basically the same? Or do you maybe expect Stafford's another year older? He's played through so many injuries. He gets hurt a lot, but he plays through them. Do you think it'll be the same approach or maybe a little more balance with Blake Corum in there? It's always a balanced attack with Sean McVay and the Rams. But how do you expect the passing focus to be this year? The same or maybe something different?
I think, it's gonna be matchup dependent. I do think that they showed that they really wanted to invest in the run game this year. They brought in Jonah Jackson from Detroit to play left guard, kicked Steve Avila into center. They have 3 massive dudes now on the interior of that line, also re-signing Kevin Dotson at right guard. They are big up there. There's no like traditional small guard, small center. Like, no, these are all dudes who are over 300 pounds. They are going to just maul. They're going to maul. They're going to play their duo scheme. They really invested in that. They brought in Colby Parkinson from Seattle, who's a very good run blocking tight end. And they drafted Corum. Like, all signs are pointing they really wanted to invest in that run game to set everything else up. And so I wouldn't be surprised if maybe things skewed a little bit more to the run, but it's still, a Sean McVay offense. They're going to light it up when they can.
There's one more thing about the running game. I should have asked this earlier. I'm like paranoid. I'm having a hard time believing like Sean McVay is such a sophisticated coach. Like I know he just doesn't like pull up someone's sports reference, but like this guy scored 27 touchdowns last year, so he should be the goal line back. But Blake Corum scored 27 touchdowns for the national championship college football team. Do you think he'll be in the mix and the goal line early in the season, or do you think that there'd be a lot of trust for Sean McVay to be putting in a rookie?
Well, I mean, Kyren is really good in the red zone too. He's really good on the goal line. He scored a lot of touchdowns last year. I think that there's that they're going to try to figure it out. I think they're going to try to see how does Corum look maybe in the preseason, but mostly in those joint practices. They have joint practices with the Cowboys, Chargers, and Texans this year. How does he look against that Cowboys front? Like, how does he look against that Texans front? Like, it'll be really, I think that'll give them a good idea of like how do they want to utilize Corum. But I think you will see, last year Sean tended to lean more towards the passing game in the red zone. Like there was that game against Baltimore where they like ran it 10 straight times until they got to an angled situation, and they threw 3 straight times to open that game and had to settle for a field goal. I don't think you're going to see that as much, although they do kind of see the screen game as an extension of the run game. I think you're going to see, Corum and Kyren get a lot of chances down there inside the 5.
Adam, I want to first of all I mentioned that 2022 season from Cooper Kupp before his mid-season injury that you mentioned earlier, and that hot start. Just looked it up, and he was on pace for about 150 catches that year. So it really was a scorching hot start. You were right about that. As for the number 3 pass catcher in this offense, is it as simple as just saying DeMarcus Robinson, or is there someone else you think could emerge?
I think DeMarcus Robinson has the inside track. He has a really good rapport with Matthew Stafford. They really clicked there down the last half of the season as they were making that playoff run. I'd say the wild card is probably a tight end in Davis Allen. He showed some flashes towards the end of last season. I know that's kind of a deep pull for fantasy, but like he had some flashes. I think you're going to see him and Parkinson kind of fill the Higbee role by aggregate, like a money ball situation. Okay. You're going to see a lot of Davis Allen in there in passing downs.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the tight end situation. You mentioned Parkinson as a run blocking specialist who they brought in from Seattle. He was somewhat useful and sometimes in as a Seahawk in fantasy, but really, nothing to write home about. So what you're saying is Allen and Parkinson will probably rotate in that role until Higbee is ready?
I think they'll rotate. I think Parkinson probably has the edge because he can both block and catch.
Okay.
Davis is still developing as a run blocker. I think, it's Sean McVay, former tight ends coach. Don't be surprised to see some 12 personnel with those guys out there together. I don't know that either will be like particularly valuable unless it's like a starting 2 tight end premium league.
Yeah. A sicko league. You're saying if you're in a sicko league, you might want to look at the Rams. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. If you're really getting deep into the tight ends there, but I do think that we'll see, the two of them share a lot of responsibility before they try to work Higbee back into it at some point mid-season.
See, as you guys alluded to, tight end might be a little hard to predict. I want to say receiver is going to be hard to predict, but yeah, but DeMarcus Robinson, he seized the job about as strongly as you can see at the end of last season. But so he had 10 targets 2 different times. He caught 6 balls 2 or 3 different times. Was that about like the Rams staff really thinking he should be the number 3 guy, or was he just the guy who was there? I can't quite tell what's going on with DeMarcus Robinson and the Rams coaching staff.
Well, first of all, like the Rams really like DeMarcus. They point out he's been in the league 9 or 10 years, and he's made the playoffs every single year. He's with the Chiefs, then Baltimore, now the Rams. He has never missed the playoffs. They really like that about him. The thing, I remember asking Stafford about this after, I think, the Baltimore game where he kind of broke out and just like, what is it that you've been able to develop this relationship, this rapport as the season's gone on when he hasn't, didn't have a lot of first team snaps in practice earlier in the year. And the simple answer was DeMarcus Robinson gets open. He gets open, and if you get open, Stafford's going to find you. The reason he got his opportunity was Tutu Atwell had a concussion after his, he had a pretty good start while Cooper was hurt last year. He had a concussion, and DeMarcus got an opportunity, and he took it. He took it to the point that he got a pretty nice deal before free agency even opened for a veteran. I think he got like $5 million or something like that. Stafford likes him. He gets open, and if he gets open, they're going to find him.
I should say the Rams led the league last year in 3 wide receiver usage, 82%. That means that a guy like Robinson, if he indeed holds on to that number 3 job, he's going to be out there for a lot of snaps, run a lot of routes.
Yeah, Adam, it took 17 minutes into your interview for us to even mention Tutu Atwell. Was that a mistake, or is that just kind of the nature of Tutu? He's going to pop up for some big plays, but as like the ship sailed on him having like a featured role in this offense.
I think he has a place because no one really has his speed, but I think it's going to be tough for him to break through because those other 3 have just such a strong hold on that receiver group. Everyone likes Tutu. He's fun in the locker room. He's, a very lively personality. And, but this is going to be, it's going to be tough for him to get a role. And this is his last year under contract with the Rams. So it'll be interesting to see, if he's able to carve out something there. But, Sean likes moving him in motion, using his speed to kind of get him open before the ball's even snapped. So it's possible, but I don't think he'll be fantasy relevant.
Adam, will end by putting you on the spot. I don't know how much you can really glean from these spring practices. We know they're not in pads. We know sometimes even the press corps can't really understand, like, what are the Rams really trying to like hammer home in these sessions as they get ready for training camp, as they get ready for the summer. But who's someone who like stood out to you, maybe surprised you in Rams OTAs, off-season practices?
It could be someone we've already talked about.
Yeah, it can be.
That's a good one. I think it would be Davis Allen. He had a really good camp. He just looks good. He looks, it looks very natural the way he runs his routes and catches his balls. He's a good pass catcher. It'll be, he's going to have to earn his playing time by improving his blocking game. But, I have my eye on him for this season.
And you just increased his ADP by 3 spots.
You may have given him an ADP. And listen, as the resident tight end sicko on this show. I appreciate you giving me more fodder. I think you're
Davis Allen actually currently does have an ADP. He's the tight end 32.
really.
It's Colby Parkinson does not have an ADP.
Okay.
That's a little interesting.
Man, the best ball bros are just outrageously informed. Really?
Yeah, I know. Yep, they're all over Davis Allen. Outrageously informed is Mr. Adam Grosbard from the Orange County Register. On Twitter, you're just at Adam Grosbard, correct? Anything you want to say about where to find your work, where we can follow you, what you might have in the pipe as training camp somehow starts later this month?
Yeah, I'll have some scintillating profiles on offensive linemen when you guys are ready for that. But yeah,
I'm ready.
We'll get this whole thing cranked up in 3 weeks. You can find me on Twitter. Or X, I guess.
Denny insists on X. I still say Twitter. I just pretend the X part doesn't exist.
The X platform.
Always Twitter, just like it's still Staples Center.
Exactly.
Yeah. Matter OCRegister.com.
Awesome, man. That's Mr. Adam Grosbard. You can find him at Adam Grosbard on Twitter. The OC Register. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And we'll be following you, over parsing every single one of your tweets and reports also.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Denny.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much to Adam. And thank you so much to you for tuning in. We have to take a short break. We'll be right back after this. Tune in and watch the toughest cycling race of the year. Today through July 21st, the world's top cyclists compete for a chance to wear the yellow jacket in the Tour de France. Stream it on Peacock today.
Pat, I actually wanted to make some sort of joke the other day about the Tour de France and say, some sort of take, it's riding bikes. What do you want me to watch somebody riding bikes? But I actually did watch a little bit, and that's not riding bikes. That's not the bike riding that I'm familiar with. No. That is great. They're going so fast. It's insane.
Fast. It's death, despair, and punishment.
Oh.
Like human suffering. It's just kind of there's too much human suffering in the world where you don't really need to inflict it on yourself like these bike riders do.
Oh my gosh!
But we're glad that they do. So we can put it on Peacock and USA Network and NBC.
They're taking turns at speeds where I'm like, I see the turn coming up and I'm like, no way. There's no possible way he can make this turn, and he easily makes the turn. Yeah,
they're taking turns faster than you, like rolling through a right rolling through a red as you're going right.
Yes.
Denny didn't slow down at all there. That pedestrian had a walk sign.
Thankfully, in my neck of the woods, there's no more enforcement of road laws, so we just do what we want.
Yeah, that's been a thing since the pandemic. That's been an ongoing talking point in St. Louis that maybe they should hand out one speeding ticket again.
I haven't seen a cop on the road in a very long time. I have gotten a lot of speeding tickets from cameras because the robots are constantly snapping pictures of me.
But here in Missouri, we still believe in freedom. And I think they outlawed the red light cams.
We are not free here. We have a red light cam. No, not even a red. I'm talking about just a speeding camera in like a tiny
speeding
road.
Camera.
I am surrounded by them. Yeah,
I would be totally screwed. I don't know what the average listener would think. My on a personal level, I'm kind of a conservative guy. I don't like to take risks. But I'm a slightly fast driver.
I can imagine that.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Denny has seen the aggressive side of me a little more.
There are two wolves in you, and I've seen the aggressive wolf.
When was the last time? How many speeding tickets would you say you've gotten in your life?
This is a story. The short of it is, from 16 to 20 years old. I'm gonna let you drink your drink there. Okay. From 16 to 20 years old, I got at least a dozen speeding tickets.
What?
Yeah,
that is a lot. Yeah, that is a lot.
I was in court begging to keep my license at least 5 times in that period. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. My dad made me dress up in a suit and tie and go downtown and beg the judge for mercy. And the judge always gave me mercy.
They did. I've probably gotten 5 or 6 in my life, but knock on wood, I've been on a huge heater. I have not gotten one since 2013. I haven't started really driving any slower, but I haven't gotten one since 2013. The key is to just go. I'm always in that gray area. Listen. No, was I below the speed limit? No. But was I like wildly over the speed limit? Also, no. I try to keep it in the gray zone. Like,
Sure.
9 to 10 miles an hour.
That's how you get on a heater. But hey, by the way, new cars, they track your speed and they send the data to insurance companies. That's fun. That's a fun development.
Yeah, I can't wait to never drive fast again. I can wait, or I also can't wait to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. And I don't know. I didn't have a whole lot of enthusiasm there.
I'm enthusiastic. I'm very much looking forward to drafting Seahawks. I've been doing it more and more in best ball because I feel like nobody really wants them. Everybody's like, whatever. This is the Pete Carroll Seahawks. And here's the thing: Petey is gone.
He's gone. It's not the Pete Carroll Seahawks, but I think the lack of enthusiasm, Denny, is because we don't quite know which Seahawks we're going to get. Where maybe it's just totally canned coach speak, but the new head coach, Mike McDonald, keeps talking about the run. They have 2 really good early round running backs in Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet. He keeps talking about the run. But in terms of like the money where his mouth is, they hired Ryan Grubbs, who ran an offense that produced the number 8 overall quarterback, 3 or 4 NFL level wide receivers passed their way into the national championship game last year. And it's a little hard to square that hiring with what Mike McDonald has been saying.
Right.
Because which side? I mean, it's Geno Smith, who had the out of nowhere career in 2022, then predictably regressed back to the mean last year. Just what do you actually think the approach is going to be for Seattle?
Yeah, no, I'm a Geno for some reason. I don't know how this happened, but I've become a Geno apologist. I really didn't intend to do that. In fact, I got in hot water with Seahawks Twitter or on the X platform back a couple years ago.
Hot water with me.
When I said Geno was not good and a bad replacement for Russell Wilson, and he ended up being way better than Russell Wilson. So I was wrong,
Still crying and coping.
Forgive me. I'm seething and coping, and this is the new one. The kids are seething. So I do think that he can run this offense. I think that it won't be super pass heavy, I don't think, but I think it will lean toward the pass. Let me give you some numbers about Ryan Grubb. By the way, it's Grubb. There's no S. I didn't know that till today.
Hold on. He must have just knocked that. It's a class. I got an NFL job, knocks a letter off his name.
Did he change his last name?
He gets a job and he's like, you know what? The S, we never really wanted the S.
Oh, okay.
So, no. Ryan Grubb.
Yeah, Ryan Grubb. All right. So here, the past 2 years with Michael Penix under center for the Washington Huskies, here are Grubb's offenses. So in 2022, 44 passes per game. 2022. That was the 3rd most in the nation. They were 118th in rushing attempts per game. Now in 2023, they got a little more balanced, but not all that much balanced. 38 passes per game in 2023. That was 11th most in the nation. They were 125th in rushing attempts per game. What I'm saying is this is a guy who calls passes at a high frequency. And he used 3 receiver sets at one of the highest rates in the nation with the Huskies. And that would change things, especially for Jaxon, Smith-Njigba, who had a hard time finding the field last year in large part. I mean, he struggled, of course, but in large part because the Seahawks were 23rd in 3 receiver usage. Only 42% of their plays used 3 receivers. To give you an idea, well, I mentioned earlier the Rams led the league with 82% 3 receiver rate. So I think it's a totally new offense. It's a totally new reality for all these guys, and I think a much more fantasy friendly reality for all these receivers.
Yeah, Denny, I do genuinely think it's a little confusing. Like, is it going to be the run team that they're claiming or the pass team that everything on paper says they probably will be? I think I am leaning to your side of the argument. Like, this guy, like, listen, I know it's Geno. I know the coach might want to hide Geno, might want to run a little bit, but Ryan Grubb, like, this is what he does.
Yeah.
This is what he did to almost perfection last year. And if that's the case, if they're even like slightly more pass heavy than expected, we have a lot of just like grossly incorrect ADPs, which is DK Metcalf, wide receiver 20, JSN, wide receiver 46, Tyler Lockett, wide receiver 51. Like,
all of those are going to be, like you said, wildly out of whack if the Seahawks are, say like incomplete and pass rate over expected, if they're top 10 in that category. No,
I mean, it is Geno. I mean,
it's not asking a lot. It's not asking a lot. By the way, it's hard to be a Geno truther when I podcast with the #1 Geno hater.
Oh, hey, come on, man.
So I do think Metcalf is a guy that I'm targeting all the time. I end up with Lockett quite a bit. I guess I'm warming up to JSN because apparently he's trying hard this offseason.
He is trying hard.
And the implication is that there wasn't a lot of effort last offseason. So maybe that does change things for him. But of course, I'm in on Noah Fant, who is every hipster's favorite late round tight end this summer. But this time it's going to work. This is what I'm saying. I'm begging you to try to change your mind about the Seahawks that you think you know.
Well, what I was going to say is maybe Geno should just consider not taking one more third down sack. But his pressure rate was actually – Geno had his best season ever from like a pressure and sack percentage last year, where he has kind of against all odds in his early to mid 30s finally cut down on the sacks he was taking. Maybe it was a 1 year statistical fluke. The sack rate was fairly high in 2022, but it's pretty reasonable in 2023.
It was actually one of the best. I think it was bottom 10 or top 10, or however you want to say it. I'm glad you pointed that out because I think that shows that he can avoid the negative plays and kind of keep this offense moving. So, every year we have offenses that are not being valued correctly. And I think Seattle jumps out to me as like the most obvious example of that for 2024.
Yeah. And because say what you will about Geno, I have said a lot of negative things. He really does spin the ball. And if he has his best ever pass-minded offensive coordinator, one of the better 3 receiver sets, he could be missing me yet again after one slightly down year since the Renaissance. And Geno, could be a huge bar. I hate to admit it. It gives me no pleasure to admit it.
Oh, no. He's talking about seething. You're going to be seething.
But why did she for 51 for Tyler Lockett?
I know, man.
We honestly lost our minds.
Like, is he like every time, or not every time, but there are some times when I have to check the Rotoworld news page to make sure Tyler Lockett has not suffered a catastrophic injury or retired.
Yes.
Because I'm like, he's going like after guys who I wouldn't even consider drafting.
He's going after, I was going to say, I was looking to see who's going after. None of them are that extreme on a one-to-one basis. Like, probably shouldn't be going after Brian Thomas. Probably shouldn't even be going after Ladd McConkey. But we just all know, like, he's not peak Tyler Lockett anymore. But the odds of Tyler Lockett's not like the wide receiver 37. This is like, he's going to be the wide receiver 37, or maybe even the wide receiver 29.
Yeah.
He's going to be Tyler Lockett, and we just need to accept that. Anything at all with Zach Charbonnet, who pancake dudes last year, extremely inefficient, not quite as efficient. I mean, it wasn't an inefficient year for Kenneth Walker as well last year, but he's a more efficient player than Mr. Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah.
Really confusing committee. Like, what are we telling folks
So,
here?
I was looking for, some stat to kind of paint the picture of whether Charbonnet and Walker are vastly different or one has more upside than the other. And I mean, I struggled to find anything that jumped out. Charbonnet finished 18th in yards after contact per rush. So that was right around like David Montgomery and Najee Harris. And then Walker finished just below him, like right next to Isaiah Pacheco. So, I think that I'm going to take Charbonnet more than Walker. I think Walker's best avenue would be a Charbonnet injury, I guess, if you're talking about a full workload. I do think that the way that the coaching staff is talking, it's going to be pretty frustrating to figure out usage. This is going to be a backfield where we're going to be parsing route running data and red zone usage and all of it throughout the season, trying to crack the code on who's going to see the opportunity for the coming week.
The one thing I'm clinging to is neither back was efficient last year, especially from rush yards over expected attempt. Kenneth Walker was pretty efficient in 2022. Kenneth Walker has something of a track record. It's kind of what I'm using to tie.
Sure.
With these two, but also, man, he's so in. I feel like he's just a bad injury waiting to happen.
Yeah, it does.
The way he runs, very violent runner. So it's a weird. I wish I had like a good answer to tell people. What are their ADPs here, real quick? Ken Walker, the RB 16, frankly a lot higher than I was expecting.
I don't even really consider him there.
No. Zach Charbonnet, RB41. He's on every single Denny roster.
That's money there. I mean,
that is money.
I mean, Charbonnet is like one Ken Walker high ankle sprain away. And again, we're not wishing this on anybody, but it happens. To being a 3-down back in a pass heavy, maybe a pass first offense. I mean, cheat code PPR points. I think it could be really fun for Charbonnet.
Denny, Johnny Venerable's almost here to talk about the Cardinals. We need to talk about the 49ers for just a second, though. How are you deciding between Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel in fantasy drafts? Or Deebo now, since the legendary 2022, or was it 2021, kind of back-to-back strange seasons, he's started to be regarded as an injury risk. But Brandon Aiyuk, basically every day, I feel like one day Brandon Aiyuk puts in a, quote, IG story that I want to be traded. Then the next day he puts a new Instagram story. He says, never mind, I don't want to be traded. It's very weird.
Yeah, he either hates the 49ers or loves them, depending on the day. Yeah,
well, sometimes within the same Insta story. Like one of the little boxes will be, I hate them. The next one's like, never mind, I like them.
Yeah.
And how do you decide between Brandon Aiyuk and Deebo Samuel?
I mean, I'm leaning toward Aiyuk because, all of his numbers were better. All of his efficiency numbers were better. All of the metrics were better last year. I think that I really do think that Aiyuk is the kind of guy you put him in a pass first offense and he's like the wide receiver 1 or like maybe the wide receiver 2 behind Tyreek or something. Like he's that sort of player. I mean, not saying Deebo is not good or can't hold a candle to Aiyuk, but I'm much more into Aiyuk. I will say we had a report in The Athletic, and we have a blurb on it today. Matt Barrows, a very good 49ers beat writer, mentioned that the Niners could be a little pass heavier this year. He pointed to a slight lean toward the pass in the postseason and increased trust in Brock Purdy, for Kyle Shanahan and the coaching staff. That changes things for all these guys, but I think particularly makes Brandon Aiyuk very exciting.
So I feel like that might be necessary for Brandon Aiyuk because I just don't know how much hotter he can really run from an efficiency perspective. Right? He caught 75 passes and had 1,300 yards last year.
That's crazy.
That just doesn't really happen, and I don't think that can happen again. Like that's just running as hot as you can possibly get. I just don't know. I think they will need increase. I can see increased attempts too. Is a way to maybe keep Christian McCaffrey healthy because there's just no one behind Christian McCaffrey on this depth chart. I don't care if they keep drafting people or that people are saying, no, you don't understand. He does like Elijah Mitchell now.
Yeah.
After half a decade of not liking Elijah Mitchell, Kyle Shanahan actually loves him and has always loved him. I feel like I am being, I hate this word, but gaslit about that. No, Shanahan's always loved Eli Mitchell.
I don't want to hear that. Come on. No. Yeah, but I mean, just talking about how hot Aiyuk ran, 75 catches, like you said, Pat. Terry McLaurin had more receptions last year, and Terry McLaurin was horrifying for fantasy.
Wow,
he was.
I know, but you're not supposed to say that.
No, I mean, very nice young man, very productive over the years, but wow, it was not cool to have Terry McLaurin on your team last year. I could tell you.
We got to get Johnny in here, but just Ricky Pearsall, where is the narrative at on this guy lately? Is he worth a late round flyer, or is he going to be one of the most forgettable first round wide receivers in recent memory in fantasy football?
I mean, he's going to – that's the thing. Okay, three wide receiver usage for the Niners, 22% of their snaps last year used 3 receivers. That's the only team that ran a lower rate of 3 receiver sets was the Falcons, Arthur Smith's Falcons. So he's never going to be on the field, and he's going to make.
But what if they pass more, like you're just claiming?
They're still not going to use 3 receivers, and then he has to be behind Deebo, behind Aiyuk, and behind Kittle, and behind CMC in the pecking order. I don't know. He's going to make some cool catches. They're going to be like, oh, this guy knows ball. This guy's this and that. Whatever. It's not going to. It's a cool haircut. He's going to be. The teammates love him, but that doesn't. I don't care.
I feel like a sign that they might use more 3 receiver sets is using a first round pick on a receiver.
I'm going to remind you of your take that Kyle Shanahan doesn't care who he drafts.
That's true. He doesn't care who he drafts, and also Brandon Aiyuk, as we know, is spending every other Insta story trying to force his way off the team.
Yeah, I know. And to the Steelers. by the way. Brandon, if you're listening, do not do this.
Do not do this. Do not go away, because we'll be right back after the short break with Mr. Johnny Venerable. NASCAR hits the streets of Chicago as the race to the playoffs heats up this summer. Don't miss the drama and excitement in the Windy City this Sunday at 4:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock. We now welcome in the man, the myth, the legend, the Colt McCoy pointing storyteller of PHNX Cardinals is Mr. Johnny Venerable. Johnny, how are you doing? And first up, tell people where they can find you. And am I calling your site the right name?
Yeah.
Or am I supposed to just say Phoenix? Am I supposed to spell out the letters or say Phoenix?
Yeah, you have to say it individually. PHNX Sports, PHNX Cardinals. And watch our daily live show, PHNX Cardinals, every day, 4:30 Mountain Time, Pacific Time, with myself and my co-host, Bo Brock, covering this fine team here in Arizona.
So another thing real quick. Is Arizona and Mountain Time or Pacific Time right now? I know you guys don't do daylight savings time. You have to be different. Which time of year are you aligned with Pacific and which time are you not?
We're aligned with Pacific right now for a little bit longer. But yeah, we don't mess with daylight savings time. I'm from the Midwest originally. It's fantastic not to have to worry about it anymore.
Yeah. So do you ever know what time it is, truly?
Not really. I Google a lot. Like I Google before this time, like, what time are we going? What time
Google
are we
current time.
East Coast, Central Time. But yeah, we do kind of like the Cardinals. They kind of just do their own thing. We just do our own thing with the time.
I would miss so many sporting events if I lived in Arizona, because I'd be like, oh yeah, the game starts at 7, and I tune in and I'd be 2 hours late.
Yeah, the NBA Finals started at like noon here.
I was going to say the NBA. Good luck knowing what time the NBA Finals start in Phoenix, Arizona. No one can tell you. No one knows. By the way, no one knows Johnny's Twitter X account. It's at Johnny Venerable, Venerable. I said no one knows it. I didn't, just because I hadn't said it yet. I didn't mean no. Who's this Johnny? No one ever heard of this Johnny guy. But Johnny, you were one of our absolute favorite guests last year.
Oh, thank you.
Had to bring you back to talk about the Cardinals. We had to bring you back just to talk about what the heck the Cardinals are going to do with Kyler Murray and this passing game this year. We know they got probably the best skill player in the draft, and Marvin Harrison Jr., but they were profoundly run heavy last season following Kyler's return from a torn ACL. Like, about as run first, run heavy as it gets. Was that just about a player returning from injury with a shaky supporting cast? A really, really poor supporting cast last year with the Cardinals. Still not amazing this year, but a lot better. Or can we infer a lack of faith in this coaching staff and Kyler Murray? Is that how they just view Kyler? What do you think that was about, that conservative approach, and might it change in 2020?
I mean, first of all, I'll never be able to top what was going on with this team last year. This will be an encore. We actually get to talk real football. They have real players now. They've rejoined the NFL. They weren't favored in any game last year, first of all.
Wow,
they were underdogs in every single game. Here's what I will say, and I've been telling everybody that will listen. They had one win. They beat Dallas pretty convincingly in Arizona last year. They had every opportunity with Joshua Dobbs, and then they sacrificed Clayton Tune to the Browns one week when they traded Dobbs to Minnesota. Like, they had every opportunity. They said, we have a win. We'll just lose out and get Caleb Williams. They actively chose not to do that. So there is not a bigger compliment, I think, to Kyler Murray, who would have had a market this offseason, than to say, hey, we're going to bring you back and we want to see you perform and we want to roll with you. And they did that. So entering the last 8 games of last year, when Kyler Murray played, they had the hardest strength of schedule in the NFL. They were 2 Matt Prater missed field goals in the finale in the final 2 minutes from going 500. So, like, say what you want about Kyler Murray. Like, they were very competitive at the end of last year and had no business. Like, it was the worst collection of front 7 defenders in the NFL. They had the worst defensive line in the NFL last year. So they're better. Now, how much better are they going to be this year? I still think they will be a run-heavy team, but the temptation is going to be there now with Marvin, with Michael Wilson, the emergence of Trey McBride. Like, it's going to be a little bit more even-keeled, but Drew Petzing, their offensive coordinator, comes from Cleveland, historically was there with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt, and he's a disciple of the Kyle Shanahan offense. So I still think early downs, like, that's what they want to do. But like, Kyler Murray is still going to be hovering around, I would say, like 30 to 35 attempts per game. His shotgun usage went way down. I think that's a good thing. 3 to 5 step drops. Like, Kyler Murray, the biggest knock I can say about Kyler Murray is he can't stay healthy over the course better way than to be able to give him a very competent running game. So he's healthy in December and January where they're hopefully playing meaningful games. So long story short, is it going to be as dominant? No, because Joshua Dobbs and Clayton Tune really struggled to throw the football. They were trotting out Hollywood Brown and Rondale Moore. That has since changed now. They're still going to be a physical team, but they'll still air it out a decent amount.
Well, speaking about airing it out, speaking of featuring the run, we don't entirely know. But what about with Kyler Murray on the ground, where his rush attempts had always been around 7 to 8 per game before last year? They still weren't low. He was still rushing 5 to 6 times per game, but it was about 2 or 3 rushes off his career average. Was that just about the injury? It wasn't as big of a fall off as I remembered. Like when I went back to his stats this week, Kyler ran a little more than I thought he did last year. Will he stay at that level? Will he kick back up? Just what can we expect from dual threat Kyler Murray?
I don't think it'll go back up to 7, 8, or 9. That was like peak Cliff Kingsbury backyard football. Just save us every Sunday, Kyler and DeAndre Hopkins. Like that was a byproduct of that in 2020. I think he had like 800 yards. Like he is built like a tank right now. If you see him, this is the biggest he's ever looked.
Wow.
But I don't think that's to take a pounding as a runner. I think that's just to hold up in the pocket. Again, like they want to implement kind of what Russell Wilson did during those peak years in Seattle, where running is a necessity, it's a luxury. It's not a necessity. I would say 5 or 6 is pretty safe. And they have a complement now of running backs led by James Conner, and they drafted Trey Benson. They like Michael Carter Jr. Like they want to be able, if they're running the football, to use it back, because they know if Kyler Murray at any point goes down, like that's their season. That's their viability. So I don't think there's going to be hardly any direct runs. I think on occasion you'll get a QB draw. That's about it. Kyler Murray in this offense, I think, again, you're looking at 30 to 35 attempts in the passing game, 5 to 6 carries max, depending on the opponent. But they drafted Trey Benson to be the heir apparent to James Conner. I'm sure we're going to get into that. But Kyler Murray, if they're under center, like he is not doing the Jalen Hurts, QB sneak. He physically can't do that, right? And a lot more of the run came with Cliff Kingsbury in the shotgun. Well, if they're eliminating more and more of that every year, just kind of by default, he's not going to run around as much. So I think it's a good thing because, again, he was not healthy at any point to end seasons under Cliff Kingsbury.
I wanted to ask you quickly about Marvin Harrison Jr. You mentioned him as, maybe a reason why the Cardinals are not going to be as massively run first as they were last season with Kyler under center. And really, they were like neck and neck with like the Falcons and the Steelers as far as run heaviness. But anyway, getting back to Harrison, his potential usage in this Arizona offense, is there any indication whether Harrison will be moved around the formation, kind of like a chess piece, or are we talking about like strictly a boundary option? At Ohio State, he ran 85% of his routes from the boundary. Just for context for the listeners, do you foresee him, being on the boundary primarily, or is it going to be moving around at all?
I think probably mostly boundary, but at the same time, like they go single wide out, it will be him. So 7 or 8 targets a game on average. Like he's their number 1 receiver.
We need higher than that, Johnny.
Okay. There were times last year when it was just Trey McBride getting 10 or 11 targets. So they have to supplement somewhere. I would say, everything that we've heard, we've had Michael Wilson on our show. We've talked to Greg Daugherty. This guy is as advertised.
Yeah,
He's a lunch pail mentality. I hate that term, but like that's what he is. He trained all draft season. He didn't participate in any draft participation, combine, nothing, to get ready for the season. And it's been as advertised in practice. He looks fantastic. Yeah. So like there'll be games where like look at the first 8 games and who they play. They play Buffalo, they play the Packers, they play the Niners, they play the Rams. They will have to score 30 to 40 points per game to win some of those games.
Sure.
So by default, he is going to get major usage early in the season. So, conservatively, I think you're looking at 1,200 plus yards, probably somewhere in the vicinity, like 15, 16 yards per catch. And if he can get double-digit touchdowns, that'd be fantastic. But like we are comparing him to the likes of Jamar Chase as a rookie who had 1,400 plus yards. Justin Jefferson, like he's in that camp. And we'll talk about the other receivers in a second, but like everybody's been clear, he is the guy. He has come in and taken the X receiver role, stranglehold. They took him 4th overall, which if you ask them, We talked to Jonathan Gannon. I stood next to him at the combine. Like, they would have loved to take a tackle there, but Harrison forced the issue. They would have loved to take a Vikings package of 6 first-rounders and gotten Joe Alt. He was just too good to pass up. He checked every box. They have a pipeline with Ohio State that took Paris Johnson Jr. the year before. He is the exception to how they want a team build. So, yeah, he is the alpha at receiver easily.
You mentioned Trey McBride as a guy who got tons of target volume in a run-first offense last year. Harrison's addition to this offense, what do you think that does to McBride's role?
You know, they were trotting out the ghost of Zach Ertz to begin last year, and it was rough. And Trey McBride was sitting right there, and he had some injuries during preseason. So it took him a little while to get going. He had over 800 yards. He only started 12 games.
It's amazing.
Which is nuts. I would say, you know, you're looking at Trey's usage. I think it's a little less in terms of total yards, maybe right around 750, 800. I think his touchdowns go up exponentially. Like, opposing teams were putting number 1 corners on Trey McBride last year. Like Jalen Johnson in Chicago, that's who he covered the entire game. Go look at that game in Chicago last year. That's not going to be the case this year. So I think he gets single covered from, you know, secondary cornerbacks and safeties and maybe off-ball linebackers, especially in the red zone. I think Trey McBride's touchdowns go from, what do you have, 4 or 5 last year to maybe 8 to 9 with similar yardage, which is still putting him top 5 tight ends in the NFL. So he will benefit in certain aspects. But, like, there were Sundays where he was the only option for Dobbs or Kyler Murray because Hollywood Brown wasn't available and Rondale Moore was hurt. And Michael Wilson was going through, you know, rookies ups and downs. So I think, again, because they've had an influx of wide receiver talent, that's going to take a little bit away from Trey, but he's still going to be an impact player for them.
Yeah, Michael Wilson was a guy you mentioned on this show last summer, and he had no hype heading into the season. He definitely looked like he had the coaching staff's trust. He looked like an NFL-ready player, but yeah, he had those ups and downs. I think he had a few injuries. He's not getting discussed this summer, understandably so, because they've added one of the best receiver prospects probably since Jamar Chase, maybe since Amari Cooper. So no one's talking about Michael Wilson. Is that a mistake? Should we occasionally mention Michael Wilson?
Everybody, I've done a fair share of these this offseason. Everybody's like, Cardinals really don't have a number 2 receiver. They do, just nobody knows about him. And I love Greg Dortch, and this is not a Greg Dortch hit piece. Greg Dortch has done podcasts for our network before.
It's getting juicy.
He's fantastic. I hope he gets paid. But Michael Wilson's their number 2 receiver. He was drafted by this regime. He went to San Francisco last year with Joshua Dobbs, caught 7 passes on 7 targets and 2 touchdowns. Like, he has the ability. It's about, like Kyler Murray, staying healthy. You know, we had him on our draft show the night they took Marvin. And I was just like, is it T. Higgins, Jamar Chase 2.0? And he's like, I don't want to put anything on my plate statistics wise. Like, if I stay healthy, I know what I can achieve. So if he plays 15, 16 games, I think this is somebody that could broach 1,000 yards and 7 or 8 touchdowns. He had 15 yards per catch last year. He played his best game at the end of the season against Seattle when Kyler Murray was healthy, just under 100 yards. He had a touchdown against Philadelphia. So, I mean, they're running 2 receiver sets. It's Michael and it's Marvin. So, and that's their base. They want to be able to do that. They don't want to run a ton of, 10 personnel. They just want those 2 big physical outside receivers that can block. Yeah, right. So I would say Michael Wilson is a very viable number 2 receiver that is only going to be helped by Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Johnny,
Michael,
I'm sorry, Pat. I just want to tell Johnny that he's probably upset the millions and millions of fantasy managers who, like me, are Dortch pilled. Okay, we firmly believe in Greg Dortch, and I know you like him. You like him. It sounds like he's a nice guy, but all the guy does is make plays. Why can't he not get out there more? He's
got to be out. He's going to be their underneath slot receiver. Like, I joke with people, he stole Rondale Moore's job. And then he stole his number. He's number 4 this year. They traded Rondale Moore.
Really? Wow.
They traded Rondale Moore. He ditched 83. He goes.
Is there no code anymore? Is there no honor anymore?
No, it's cutthroat, man. Here in the desert. Rondale Moore went to Atlanta for Desmond Ridder, a rare player for player trade. And then Greg Dortch has his college number and his high school number from Wake Forest, number 4.
I mean, look at Dortch was insanely productive in college. He was clearly better than Rondale Moore, like from the get-go. And it was very frustrating. It's been very frustrating to watch this guy struggle to get on the field, but I'm glad he's going to be running.
Draft stigma where you're drafted is a big problem. You guys know this. Rondale Moore was a second-round pick by Steve Keim, an egregious pick at the time. And Greg Dortch was undrafted. I mean, he's undrafted. So everybody, Cliff Kingsbury, and then, last year, Cardinal coaches, everybody's like, they see Rondale Moore, and he's jacked up, and he can run sub 4.4. He's not sounds harsh, but he's just not a winning NFL player. Like, he's an NFL player.
He's too small.
He'd be the smallest player on this podcast by a considerable margin. That's bad. That's bad.
Yeah, that's true. I've stood next to him, but he's a nice guy. I hope he does well in Atlanta. Greg Dortch is an infinitely better football player. It's not even close.
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to put a bow on Michael Wilson, where a guy who barely snuck into the top 100 in the draft last year, and then almost had 600 yards, as you just laid out, super run heavy, cycling through quarterbacks, a team that didn't want to be passing. He was hurt. He only appeared in 13 games. Michael Wilson still had almost 600 yards as a rookie, almost 15 yards per catch. So it really is not a name who should be slept on, and we'll sleep on him the rest of the summer. Like, we'll probably never talk about him again.
Absolutely.
But that's a huge mistake by us. It would be a huge mistake for us not to ask you about the Cardinals backfield. Denny wants to ask you how things are going between James Conner and Trey Benson.
So, this has generated a lot of discourse on the X platform, formerly known as Twitter, where
Please stop it.
I'm just calling it what it is. Where it's, the question is Trey Benson here to take James Conner's job? Or is this a split backfield? Who's going to run routes? Who's going to see targets? Is Benson strictly a change of pace guy? What do you say, Johnny?
It's tough. They love James Conner. He's one of the best signings in franchise history as a free agent, like he just is. He had his best year as an NFL player last year. But he's also guaranteed to miss time, misses 3 to 5 games a year. That's Trey Benson's window, because I think the change of pace guy is the guy they claimed off of waivers last year, and Michael Carter Jr., who Aaron Rodgers deemed expendable so they could sign Dalvin Cook and run him into the ground. And so the Cardinals picked up Michael Carter Jr. knowing he had a year left on his contract, and it was really productive for them. Go watch him against Philadelphia at the end of last year. Anybody who helped Jonathan Gannon beat the Eagles last year in Philadelphia, you're a made man with the Arizona Cardinals. Like,
that's a good point.
He hasn't come out and said that, but Michael Carter ran all over Gannon's ex-team in Philadelphia. So he's the number 2 back. So, again, I like Trey Benson. He was a top 70 pick, and he was awesome at Florida State. But I think he's RB3 to start this year. Now, what I will say, James Conner goes down. Trey takes James Conner's workload and his style of play. Because again, like I mentioned earlier, Kyler Murray can't sneak it on the 1 yard line. He can't do the tush push. You always need a big physical back. And that's not a knock against Kyler. That's just the reality of the situation. Michael Carter's the Chase Edmonds undersized player, shifty, catching back, right? Trey Benson didn't catch a lot of balls at Florida State. Doesn't mean he can't do it. I think Trey Benson is the heir apparent to James Conner in 2025. I don't think fantasy enthusiasts are going to get what they want this year. I think, unlike Michael Wilson, I think Trey Benson is going to be overdrafted. And then it's if James, God forbid, has a season-ending injury, but when James is healthy, he's going to get the bulk share of that workload, because the best version of this offense last year ran through him. I mean, his game has aged very well, but again, he misses time every year.
There is going to be a world record amount of crying and coping if you're right about this, because Trey Benson is currently the RB30 in best ball drafts. He's going
not very smart.
Ahead of Brian Robinson Jr. He's going ahead of Javonte Williams. I mean, some of these guys are going ahead of
again, he could always force the issue and light up the preseason and make it an issue. I haven't seen him with pads on yet, but it's I know how they operate, and they like Michael Carter Jr. If they run the ball, I don't know, 25, 30 times a game, and James Conner's getting 20 of those carries, 18 to 20, what's left for Trey Benson? He's not getting all of those, right? So
I guess the argument is that he was an explosive back in college, where it kind of like a Ken Walker type, 3 yards, 3 yards, 3 yards. And
he gets compared to Jonathan Taylor a lot, which is probably irresponsible.
Right. So I guess that's the hope, but it sounds like a lot of hope. And RB30, I actually didn't know it was that high. Are we talking about best ball right now?
Best ball, RB30 on underdog, RB27 for James Conner.
I'm guessing Benson will be lower in redraft leagues because people are more well adjusted. I think best ball bros are just overthinking this a little bit.
He's not a startable player until James Conner is not around.
Yes.
you'd have to have a pretty deep league and just be kind of looking for anything as a flex player. But you're keeping him, you're housing him until November, and you're hoping that he sees, an opportunity and runs with it. But again, like until James Conner's not on this team, they're not going to start Trey Benson over James Conner. It's not happening. Now he is a free agent. This is his last year with the Cardinals. So like Trey Benson is going to be everybody's, as long as he doesn't fall on his face this year, everybody's fantasy darling when we talk next year.
Right.
But it's just, they're going to keep him kind of housed, and they love playing rookies. They embrace rookies, but James Conner is one of their best players.
Michael Carter essentially doesn't have an ADP. He's the RB tied for RB 69 right now. Not a joke. He's tied with undrafted Mizzou running back, my guy, Cody Schrader, with the 49ers. So,
I didn't even know who.
Say Cody Schrader. You didn't know Cody Schrader was almost a Heisman finalist.
No. I knew who he was. He ran for 1 million yards in college. Obviously, not an NFL caliber player.
Come on, man. Hey, tell that to Ohio State. Tell that to Kyle's supposed Buckeyes.
He drafted Darius Robinson in Arizona. He's a good player.
That's right. Exactly. Mizzou Tigers back on the rise. I had some final thought about that Cardinals backfield there. Man, that's the first bombshell we've gotten in 2 preview shows. There's basically like Trey Benson being wildly overdrafted. We're just
nobody watches the Cardinals, so it's like we have to come on here and be honest about it.
Yeah.
And I see all these rankings and these lists in the offseason, and it's just like, okay, clearly you don't pay attention, which is fine. Not a lot of people watch this team, but it's like, come on, guys, open your eyes a little bit.
It could be a great run out for people taking Benson where he's going, because if Connor suffers, an early season injury that keeps him out from all or most of the season, then you're in like that. Okay, that pick worked. Okay, right. But like process wise, I don't know.
You make it really. Phoenix is an enormous market, and like no one watches the team. You are right. It's really.
This is a shameless plug. We had Mina Kimes on our podcast like a month ago, and she was just not like we were ripping on people at the network, and she's like, "I'm just gonna be honest with you, like nobody watched this team last year." I'm like, "Yeah, we know. Clearly, we know." Now, I do have a bone to pick with Pat on this show, Denny, about he had his GM rankings, and he had Ron Carthon over Monty Ossenford, and I don't know what the hell that's about. Ron Carthon, he's basically Steve Keim 2.0, signing every 30-year-old wide receiver, and then Ossenford is hoarding draft picks and draft capital. I don't know. Will Levis?
I think you have an argument.
Choice, in my opinion.
I'm not a Carthorne guy. Pat obviously big on Ron Carthorne.
Hold on. No, hold on. First off, it's all about they both only had a year on the job. We can't get too crazy one way or another. And Monty, I like Monty's process, which I laid out. But basically I have to say, we need more information on Monty. Sure. Monty didn't really, by design, didn't really do much last year. Rand Carthon's out here dazzling me, spending money.
I have, and I don't say this like hyperbole, I've disliked everything the Titans have done since he's taken over. I don't like any of their players. Yeah. I think, again, that's a house of cards that's going to crumble. I've seen it happen in Arizona with Rodney Hudson and AJ Green. It's super reminiscent of that. So, but
listen, anytime you can go all in on Will Levis, you are actually legally. It's in the CBA that you have.
Who plays running back for the Titans? Do you guys know?
We do.
We do know, but we don't know. They don't know. They don't know. Every time they comment on the running backs, they just go, they're interchangeable.
We accidentally signed the same guy. Tony Pollard and Tajay Spears are the same guy. But we like that. They say we like that because we can just put whoever in there. No. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. And they know it, and we know. They know we know it. Okay, but they have to put on the facade that we intentionally did this. They didn't intentionally do this.
No, they did not intentionally do it. Johnny, we did not intentionally. Man, I didn't have a segue there. I was hoping something would come to me. We have to ask you before you go about who has surprised you so far in the Cardinals offseason program. Cardinals OTAs can be a player we've already talked about. We'll focus on skill player. Just someone who stood out in one way or another in Cardinals offseason practice.
I mean, it's probably Marvin Harrison Jr. I mean, again, we talk about it on every podcast we do. The Cardinals are typically not in a position to take a player like this, not because they're not bad, but typically this caliber player, usually 3 quarterbacks don't go above the best player in the draft, and he falls to you at pick 4. And here's what I'll say: they walked a fine line last year of they were competitive most Sundays, and they rebuilt on the fly, and they got their their quarterback back and acclimated, and he started games at the end of last year, and they did just enough to give hope, but at the same time putting themselves in a position to take Marvin Harrison Jr. Like, that does not happen. When they beat the Eagles, like, we had a morning period on our show, like, get ready to learn Joe Alt because it wasn't going to happen, right? And then, truth be told, Jaden Daniels, the prodigal son here, ASU, did us some favors, and Drake May aced the draft process. And so we're sitting here in March. It's like, can this really happen? And there were talk of them trading down with the Vikings, and that would have been fine. But again, like, when you're in a position to take a player of this caliber, his dad's in Arizona, it just seemed very surreal for this franchise to have that happen. So, I mean, it's the 10-year or 20-year anniversary of when they drafted Larry Fitzgerald. So it feels very kind of poetic. So it's got to be Marvin. Like, he's going to become what a lot of people think, like, is the next great AJ Green, Julio Jones, Calvin Johnson. He has that ability. And we haven't even seen him with pads on yet, but he just looks different.
Yeah, I will never get ready to learn Joe Alt, by the way, as long as I live. And it is, everyone has said that about Marvin, Johnny. He just seems like the classic, like, the guy. He's just the classic. This guy is different.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter the era. The different guys still show up and stand out, and just like kind of like a man apart. And Marvin Harrison has just exuded that this entire process. And I'm glad to hear that's showing up on the practice field so far.
Yeah, Michael Wilson, Marvin, I think, and then Trey McBride. Like, say what you want about the Cardinals. Like, they're not paying anybody anything. They're all on rookie deals. They're all going to grow with Kyler Murray. People make a big deal about K1, what they're paying him. Like, who else are they paying? They're not paying anybody. And so I think, again, they had 7 picks in the top 90 this year. First time since, like, the 91 Dallas Cowboys have done that in a really good draft. So I think people are sleeping on them a little bit. Their schedule's tough. If they can get through the first 8 games, 3-5 at worst, there's a lot of Carolina and Seattle and New England in the second half. They'll be a surprise team if they can keep their head above water past Halloween. They can't start like 1-6 though.
If I can forget about Jonathan Gannon going pew, 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 pew to start his tenure as the coach, if I can forget about that, I'm on board with the Cardinals.
I'm on board with Gannon, by the way. You referenced it earlier, kind of, Johnny. They were just so well organized last year. Like, they overachieved kind of all year. Like, even when they weren't winning any games, they were way more competitive, like, every week than people expected. They seem really, really, really well organized.
Not to bang on Cliff Kingsbury on every podcast I do, but there were times – had I not seen them practice, I'd be like, did this team practice all week? They did not look like they practiced during the week. And in that 2022 season where he got fired, just looked like they showed up. Whereas Gannon was a breath of fresh air. He has player buy-in. And, like, yeah, the Cardinals social media team didn't do him any favors with that video. It's like, way to pump up your coach.
Yeah, for real. Like, the social media interns, they needed talking to.
He gave us 20 minutes uninterrupted at the combine, myself and Bo, on our podcast, and he was awesome. He was fantastic. And again, like, go back, and the infrastructure of Philadelphia was Steichen, who obviously was very competitive last year, Gannon, who took over a culture, had to rebuild from scratch, beat Philadelphia in Philadelphia, and the hot mess that's left with Sirianni and Big Dom in Philly. Like, I don't know. I think we kind of know what was going down the year they went to the Super Bowl. Like, Sirianni looked like a high school coach in that game against Gannon. I mean, it was night and day. The personnel difference, when the Eagles win that game, they win the NFC East. I mean, yeah, I'm all in on Gannon. And I think this year, I mean, they're not going to regress, so people are going to be high on them anyway. But, don't be surprised if they're hovering around 500 at some points this year.
They're scrappy. I like them.
Yeah, there's so much pressure on Big Dom this year. There's so much pressure on whoever's going to follow Johnny in our division preview series. Johnny does such good stuff for the second year in a row. And again, tell people where they can find your stuff, what you're doing every day at PHNX Cardinals.
Yeah, live show every day on YouTube, PHNX Cardinals, 4:30 Mountain Time. Myself, my co-host, Bo Brock. I'm at Johnny Venerable. It has become the #1 Arizona Cardinals podcast, so we're very fortunate and blessed for that. But, yeah, it's going to be fun covering a team this year that's got some real players, man. Can't wait to get out to training camp and see MHJ and the gang this year.
That's awesome.
Amazing stuff. And I'm Googling what Mountain Time is and why you are currently not in Mountain Time. Johnny, thank you so much. Thank you so much to Mr. Adam Grosbard, who began the show with us. Thank you to Denny for helping us break down the Seahawks and 49ers. For Denny, I'm Pat. We'll be back next week.